female model who was appreciated by media judges was cruelly murdered at the peak of her career just less than 3 meters from her home as the police investigation unfolded. A man who had been hiding in plain sight for over 20 years suddenly appeared in the public eye. This man is Mark Phillip Dixie, one of the most notorious perverts in the UK, who many women also consider one of the most disgusting men. So what exactly did he do to be so hated? And how was he to commit crimes for over 20 years before finally being caught? Now, let us step into one of the most sensational serial murder cases in British history, the notorious London sex predator. One of the victims, Annie Bowman, was born on September 11, 1987, in Catton, London. From a young age, she was known for her beauty. At just 18 years old, she became the face of a world-renowned luxury brand, the Swatch Group. Thanks to the global influence of the company, Sally quickly became one of the most sought-after international models. But just as her career was taking off, a sudden and evil force appeared and took her life just as it was about to bloom. On the morning of September 25th, around 6:30 a.m., a jogger in London's Shadwell district discovered a woman's body in a pile of construction debris. Officers arrived to find a young woman, later identified as Shani Bowman, lying half-naked with no signs of life. She had died between 4 and 6 a.m., suffering 7 stab wounds, 3 of which pierced her body completely. Bite marks were also found near one wound, and male DNA was recovered. The police couldn't find a matching DNA profile in the criminal database, so they had to look for other ways to crack the case. After carefully examining the scene, investigators discovered that Sally's home was a mere 3 meters away from where the body was found. They also noticed a large amount of red stains at Sally's doorstep. This led to the suspicion: could Sally's home actually be the primary crime scene? But once officers entered her house to investigate, they immediately ruled out that possibility. There were no bloodstains, and her parents, who were home all night, heard nothing. This led investigators to believe the attack happened outside the front door. According to Sally's sister, the two had attended a birthday party the night before and returned around 1 a.m. Although her sister offered for her to stay over, Sally chose to leave and arranged to meet her boyfriend, Lewis Sproston. The couple had recently argued and were planning to talk things through. Sally's sister last saw her getting into a taxi around 2 a.m. to meet her boyfriend. He confirmed they met at 2:30 a.m., had a tense conversation, and broke up. Around 4:15 a.m., he dropped Sally off at her home, but didn't see her go inside. Given the timeline, police initially saw Lewis as the prime suspect. However, DNA tests ruled him out. During the investigation, officers stumbled upon a crucial clue, one that would eventually lead to the real killer's identity. On the same day Sally Bowman was murdered, another woman in the same neighborhood was attacked around 3 a.m., just an hour earlier. She was on the phone when a stranger approached, quietly said, "I'm sorry," then suddenly slashed her with a knife. The woman fought back and accidentally cut the attacker's arm, leaving behind his blood. A passing taxi driver heard her screams, causing the attacker to flee. She survived, and the blood was sent for DNA testing, but at the time there was no match in the police database, and the case was put on hold. When the police submitted the suspect's DNA from Sally's case for comparison, the forensic technician noticed it matched DNA from an earlier crime. Clearly, the two cases were committed by the same person. Only then did investigators realize they were dealing with a serial killer, someone with a deeply twisted psyche. Fearing the killer would strike again, police acted quickly and located the young woman who had previously escaped an attack. She described the attacker as a white male, around 30 years old, wearing a white shirt, about 1.8 meters tall with short black hair. Using her description, police created a composite sketch and released it to the public, hoping someone could identify him. But because the attack happened at night, the woman hadn't seen the attacker's face clearly, and the sketch resembled a very generic man. A face that could be anyone. Within days, the police received hundreds of tips, but none led to the real suspect. With no solid leads from the sketch, police turned fully to the DNA evidence, knowing it was the one clue that couldn't lie. In the following period, the police began conducting door-to-door visits with residents near the crime scene, hoping to match the killer's DNA through a relative. Even after more than 6 months and over 6,000 households visited, the police still hadn't found a single useful lead on the killer. In fact, as the investigation expanded, the entire town of Croydon became gripped with fear. knowing a twisted serial killer was hiding somewhere among them. Residents were increasingly anxious, especially young women, who wouldn't dare go out at night unless accompanied. This not only disrupted daily life, but also had a major impact on Croydon's nighttime economy, which saw a significant drop. The killer's presence had essentially paralyzed the entire town's commercial activity. Frustrated, many citizens began to voice complaints and demand action from the authorities. Under immense public pressure, the police had no room for error. Then, just as they were running out of options, a seemingly unrelated street fight led to a shocking breakthrough that finally exposed the killer's identity. In March 2006, a violent bar fight broke out at a pub called Football 98. Police arrived quickly, calmed the scene, and took several men in for questioning. Since the injuries were minor and both sides agreed not to press charges, the men were released after giving fingerprints and DNA samples, as required by UK law at the time. But one man, Mark Dixie, acted strangely. He was visibly nervous, almost in tears, even though he hadn't been charged with anything. Police noticed his behavior but let him go. 12 days later, a forensic lab called with shocking news. Mark Dixie's DNA matched the sample found in the body of murder victim Sally Ann Bowman. After a year-long hunt, police had finally found the killer by complete chance. Born in 1970 in South London, Mark Dixie had a long history of petty crimes. In 1988, he was convicted of theft and received a 2-year suspended sentence, meaning no jail time. But during his probation, he was arrested again for another offense just a month later. In 1989, he was once again charged with theft and sentenced to 80 hours of community service. In 1990, he was arrested for assaulting a police officer but served just 3 years in prison before being released. In 1993, he moved to Australia, but even there, he didn't stop committing crimes. Robbery and sexual misconduct were frequent. Eventually, in 1999, he was deported from Australia. Because the UK didn't have a national DNA database before 1995, and his most serious crimes happened abroad, his profile had never matched until now. And by now, some sharp-eyed viewers may have noticed something odd. Despite his long criminal history, Mark had never committed any serious violent crimes before Sally's case. Most of his earlier offenses were relatively minor. This allowed him to fly under the radar for years, continuing his crimes undetected. Until the 2005 murder of 18-year-old Sally Ann Bowman, the brutality of the crime showed a deeply disturbed individual. He had always been like this. He was just skilled at hiding it. That is what made Mark Phillip Dixie one of the most cunning and dangerous criminals in modern British history. When police arrived at his home to arrest him, they discovered he had already fled to Amsterdam, Netherlands, just 12 days after his initial police interview. Clearly, he was highly alert and had long sensed that trouble was closing in. However, life in Amsterdam wasn't kind to him. Within 3 months, Mark found himself unable to adapt. After a heated dispute with his landlord, he was evicted, leaving him with no choice but to return to the UK. Of course, the main reason he dared to come back was his mistaken belief that the police hadn't uncovered his identity. But the moment he set foot back in the country, authorities were already watching him. On June 28, 2006, Mark Dixie was officially arrested. Even then, he refused to confess to the murder. Instead, he fabricated a ludicrous story to defend himself, claiming he had merely stumbled upon Sally's body and, on impulse, committed an indecent act. But police didn't believe a word. Not only did they have his DNA evidence, they had also meticulously traced his movements on the night of the crime and had a thorough understanding of his psychological profile. According to the investigation, the night of the murder was also Mark's birthday. He had gone out drinking and taking illegal substances with friends. During the night, he received a phone call from his girlfriend, who broke up with him. Enraged and under the influence, Mark's violent impulses were triggered. Armed with a knife, he wandered the streets looking for a victim. He first attempted to attack a woman who was on her phone but was scared off by a passing taxi. Shortly afterward, he spotted 18-year-old Sally, who had just stepped out of her ex-boyfriend's car. As soon as the car drove away, he rushed toward her. He murdered her without hesitation, then assaulted her. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Mark eventually stopped resisting and stated he would only speak once his lawyer arrived. But this was just the beginning. After the trial began, more long-buried crimes started to surface, revealing that Sally was far from his only victim. On February 5, 2008, Mark Dixie stood trial at London's Central Criminal Court. Given the overwhelming evidence against him, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole for 37 years. For the people of London, it was a moment of collective relief. Finally, the serial killer who had haunted their city for years was behind bars. But the case was far from over. Shortly after his identity was made public, a woman from Australia came forward with a harrowing story. She revealed that in 1998, she had been stabbed 7 times and assaulted by Mark Dixie, surviving the brutal attack by sheer miracle. The case had gone cold for years due to a lack of evidence, until she recognized his face in a news broadcast and reported it to the police. Soon after, 2 more women stepped forward, each claiming to have been attacked by Mark in the past but had never reported the assaults. This surge of reports prompted investigators to reopen dozens of unsolved violent cases across London. Eventually, at least 17 crimes were officially linked to Mark Dixie. One particularly disturbing case involved a 2003 assault in Spain. Although Mark was the true attacker, an innocent man named Romano van der Dusen was wrongly convicted and spent 12 years in prison. It wasn't until February 2016, 15 years later, that the truth came to light. Romano was finally exonerated after losing over a decade of his life for a crime he didn't commit. Although the official count remains at 17, investigators believe the true number of victims is much higher, likely exceeding 20, when considering the many unreported and unsolved cases. Despite 2 decades of predatory behavior, Mark had no major criminal record prior to the 2006 murder of Sally Ann Bowman. He wasn't particularly intelligent, just incredibly lucky. Time and again, he slipped through the cracks of law enforcement, often aided by coincidence or chillingly by others being mistaken for him. But that luck finally ran out the night he murdered Sally.